my name is Kylie Kimberlin, and I will be going through my slideshow today. This is the CAA number 3 historical timeline. Our first case that we're going to come across is MEYER versus Nebraska in 1923. Prior to the year 1923, teachers were banned from teaching foreign languages to their students. A teaching official by the name of Robert MEYER was convicted for teaching the German language and culture to his students. MEYER chose to protest against the Supreme Court and rely solely on the Due Process Clause, which is a clause in the Constitution that forces the government to respect all legal rights to an individual. So basically, he had the right to teach his students about the culture, the language, what so have ya. This case spoke volumes to several people, specifically regarding our justice system. And this kind of begins to portray what the First Amendment is like, so freedom of speech and that sort of thing. It is because of MEYER that we are able to learn and or teach foreign languages in our school systems today. Next, we have Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, which is one of my personal favorites. Brown versus Board of Education took place in Topeka, Kansas. This act took place in order to outlaw racial segregation in public school systems. This case and 4 other cases were all combined into one, actually, and they all 4 of those other cases involved school segregation as well, so the court took it upon themselves to rename all of them as a whole into Brown versus Board of Education. Brown versus Board of Education played a huge role in the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement explained and emphasized that separate but equal education did not exist, and students were not being treated equally in their school systems. This case was a huge turning point in American history and influenced several individuals and cases that took place in later years, which we will roll right into. Next, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which obviously came after Brown versus Board of Education. And you'll notice that we talk about really, really prominent individuals such as MLK and Rosa Parks and people like that. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was very similar to Brown versus Board of Education Act in 1954. However, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 specifically addressed discrimination against race, color, religion, sex, and origin. So this one's obviously more broad, as you can tell. The Civil Rights Act banned discrimination against all of the categories above regarding public places such as courthouses, parks, movie theaters, and so forth. So pretty much like wherever they would go, it was saying that like they shouldn't be discriminated against that. It's not their fault for being a certain gender or being a certain race, or believing in a certain religion. This act forced a zero-tolerance policy for minorities to be turned away due to their skin color, religion, gender, etc. The Civil Rights Act involved stories from many individuals who became leaders in history that we continuously value and look up to, such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and so many more. Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which took place from 1965 to 1968. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act took place throughout the years of 1965 to 1968. The act was also referred to as Bilingual Education Act of 1968. It's due to federal grants that the bilingual education program began to develop and that it's continuously growing. Due to this act, it created several opportunities for non-English language learners to have the same, if not even better, experiences from those who are not bilingual. So in prior chapters, we have discussed that some parents think it's not okay to have your students be bilingual, and obviously that is totally not the case. I think that this act specifically speaks volumes as well as all of them do, but this one specifically because we were given grants to continuously grow, and we're still growing in foreign language. Next, we have Equal Education Opportunity Act of 1974. Equal Educational Opportunity Acts of 1974 was a movement to prevent discrimination against faculty, staff, and students. This movement requires the district to grab control over the barriers that students, teachers, and various other staff members might have upon one another. So whether they have heard something in their personal life or what have you, the school is kind of taking it upon themselves to make sure that their teachers, their faculty, and students and everyone gets along, and it's a happy learning environment for them, as well as a work environment for the faculty. This act guarantees an educational free and This act, guarantees an educational free and unequal treatment, and that there is no discrimination. Lau versus Nichols took place in 1974. Lau versus Nichols was a case that fell under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Lau versus Nichols came about because a school district located in San Francisco, California, which had close to about 2,900 students who were non-English language learners. These students had a history specifically in the Chinese ancestry, and they weren't receiving the proper learning environment that they needed to have. Meanwhile, there were approximately about 1,000 students who were provided English language classes. However, this was Kinney Kimin Lau. She filed a lawsuit that the San Francisco Unified School District violated their rights regarding the race discrimination. So obviously they were being prejudiced towards those who needed more help in the Chinese ancestry area. Next, we have SERNA versus Portals that also took place in 1974. SERNA versus Portals was another court case in which a school district's curriculum was insufficient regarding their Spanish-speaking children in New Mexico. Parents began to speak up as their children were constantly failing their classes, and whether they were dropping out, they definitely had the desire to. And luckily, the judge sided with the parents and agreed that the school was going against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So once again, we have some discrimination taking place. Next, we have Castaneda versus Pickard in 1981. Sorry, my pronunciation is not so well. Castaneda versus Pickard was a case in which both students and parents complained of discrimination. These so-called classrooms were being separated into groups of race and ethnicity. Due to the discrimination that took place within the classroom, the court decided for a 3-part assessment to be given to each student. This assessment would indicate how the program met each child's needs. So the needs that needed to be met were sound educational theory, implement adequate resources, so just giving them the right resources they needed, whether it was to go through magazines, newspapers, that sort of thing, as long as they were receiving the right educational facts from that. And last but not least, they must be proven to be effective by overcoming their prior language barriers. The No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, this is also another one of my favorites. The No Child Left Behind Act is one of the most memorable and important cases that we have learned about thus far, in my opinion. I know there's great ones all around. The No Child Left Behind Act is the idea of assessing all students, no matter what their learning differences or their past learning experiences may have been. The idea is to improve the students' educational skills and close as many gaps as you can. The teacher should have specific goals to help their students succeed wherever they are and be better off. You want your students to be better off than they were when they first came to you or when you first encountered one another. All of these opportunities should be the same for all of your students. That is super important to remember. I believe this is last but not least, Every Child Succeeds Act in 2015. Every Child Succeeds Act was signed by Obama in the year of 2015 and still kind of applies today. The act requires that every student should be taught a specific curriculum that prepares them for college. This is super important, as much as we as students may have hated it in high school or middle school. It's super duper important, and I agree that it needs to take place. The act also promises that all educators will be informed on how to gauge your students' success and their progress while you have them in your class. The main reason that this act took place was because of prior years when students were not correctly assessed, especially our English language learners. They were specifically mandated to pass like a certain amount of exams, specifically in the English language area and math, I'm pretty sure. And their test scores obviously didn't do so well because they weren't ready for that. So they were receiving a bad reputation because their test scores didn't resemble like how intelligent they were, or maybe how they could recite what they've learned to one another. And then I have my references page. We have the Wright book and the Crawford book, and then various links that I had researched on my own time. Thank you so much.